So this is the first set of notes for the urinary system, and I've listed the objectives of what you need to know for the urinary system. So here they are, and there's a picture of a kidney. Okay, so the urinary system is composed of two kidneys, okay, typically. Two ureters, which are the tubes that are going to take the urine from the kidney down to the bladder. Okay, usually people have one urinary bladder and then the urethra. We're going to talk about the location of the kidneys here on the next slide. Okay, so the kidneys are what we call retroperitoneal. So that means that they're behind the serous membrane that lines the abdominal cavity. Okay, so the peritoneum is the membrane that lines the organs in the abdominal pelvic cavity. So that's the peritoneum. So the kidneys are behind it. They're posterior to it. So they're kind of adhered to the dorsal wall, the dorsal abdominal walls where they're hooked to. The level where they are is around the vertebrae T12 to L3. Okay, but then that's where the left one is, but the right one is lower than the left one. So they're not equal in the body. The right one is lower than the left one. Okay, now it's important to realize that they're really kind of not protected by bone. Most of the things in our body are protected. Most of the things that are really important in our body are protected by bone. So think about like your brain, your heart, your lungs. They're all covered by bone, like the skull or the ribs. But the kidneys aren't. So they're down low. So think about like if somebody gets kidney punched, or it can cause urine to be in their blood. So they're really vulnerable to being hit or being damaged. Let's see. Okay, so here's the image of retroperitoneal. Okay, so they're behind the peritoneum. That's important. They're adhered to the dorsal abdominal wall. Okay, now the way that and if you remember, think about when you did the cat or the pig dissection, you can kind of picture maybe where they were, how dorsal they are. Okay, now the layers around the kidney from the inside to the outside. Okay, so if we go these are the kidneys right here. Okay, and we have a cut. This cut is, I guess it's transverse, so we're just taking like the top part of the body off. So here are the kidneys. Here are the kidneys. Okay, so the first layer around them is called the renal capsule. Okay, now the renal capsule, I always say it's saran-like, so it's like saran wrap or plastic wrap that's around it. So it's adhered to the surface of the kidney. And what it's going to do is it's going to protect the kidney from infection or trauma. So it's just kind of like, it's like in a Ziploc bag. Okay, then there's a layer of fat that's around it, which is called the perinephric or perirenal fat. And then there's the renal fascia. Okay, and the renal fascia is what's going to connect it to the dorsal wall. Okay, so it's dense, irregular connective tissue. It kind of just, it's maybe like duct tape that's keeping it held into the back of the body wall. And then there's another layer of fat. Okay, so we have all of these layers around it to keep the kidneys in place. Okay, to keep them stabilized because they're not in bone. Okay, to keep them stabilized and to protect them. Can you hear the cat? The cat is purring, and she's like, "Oh, cool, you're at the desk." So all those layers are there to really protect the kidneys and to keep them where they need to be. So if someone has anorexia or they've lost a lot of body fat, the kidneys sometimes will fall, and it'll kink the ureter, so they won't stay where they need to be. So this is a place where adipose tissue is important. I hope that makes sense. I think it does. Okay, now kidney function. So these are, the numbers got messed up. Where? Elimination of waste. Okay, so we're going to talk about your urine and what's in urine. Okay, regulation of ions. Okay, so by getting rid of ions, it's going to allow us to regulate them. The kidneys are important in regulating the pH of the blood. They're also important in regulating blood pressure. Okay, because if we get rid of urine, we reduce the blood volume. Okay, and they can eliminate, oh, the 5 was right, it can eliminate things like drugs that we take, biologically active molecules. So really we're talking about drugs or things that we take into our body that we need to get rid of. Okay, now, these don't have much to do with elimination, so this book categorizes them as a different set of things. So one thing is they release erythropoietin. Okay, they regulate calcium homeostasis by releasing calcitriol. Okay, so that's important in bone. And then they're also going to participate in gluconeogenesis. So this is when we make glucose from amino acids. Okay, so what's a waste? So a waste in general, it's something that your body can't use. Okay, so it could be the corn kernels left over from the corn. It could be anything that's going to end up in your feces, in your urine. It's carbon dioxide, things that we exhale. Okay, now a metabolic waste is waste that is a byproduct of metabolism. Okay, so it's a byproduct of the normal biochemical processes that our body does. Okay, so 3 main nitrogenous wastes. Okay, so if nitrogen compounds build up in our blood, they cause problems. Okay, so they're toxic, so we don't want them to build up in our blood. Okay, so urea comes from proteins. Okay, and sorry. They come from amino acids. Okay, so if you look at urea, okay, so it's it comes from the amino acids. Okay, we remove the NH2, the amino group. It forms ammonia, and then the liver's going to convert it to urea, and then we get rid of it in our urine. Okay, that's the primary one. So it comes from proteins is what I really want you to know. Okay, so it's the breakdown product of protein. Okay, uric acid comes from nucleic acids. Okay, so if you think about the A's, T's, C's, and G's, okay, and when we break them down, okay, we need to get rid of the nitrogen compounds that are in those. Okay, and they become uric acid. Okay, and then creatinine comes from creatine phosphate. Okay, so here's what creatinine looks like, and this is a phosphate carrier. It's important in ATP production. Okay, now one way that we evaluate kidney function is with this test called a BUN. So it's blood, urea, and nitrogen. So we're looking to see how much, if your kidneys are working, we're looking to see if you're actually removing the nitrogen from the blood. Okay, so if you're in renal failure, okay, they call that azotemia, is when the BUN is really high. Okay, and you'll talk about this in lab when we do the urinalysis kidney lab. Okay, so the BUN is really high. So it leads to uremia. Okay, and the having so much nitrogen in your blood, what it does is it makes you sick. Okay, so it causes toxic effects. So it can cause diarrhea, it can cause vomiting, it causes dyspnea, which is irregular breathing. Okay, and it can cause your heart to be irregular, so it can cause cardiac arrhythmia. Lots of times, uremia doesn't occur until you've lost 90% of the renal function. Okay, so your kidneys are amazingly good at doing their job. Okay, so you can survive with 1/3 of the function of one kidney and not have to go on dialysis. This just is a place to go into the size. So they say the size of the kidneys are about 100 grams a piece. Okay, so it's kind of like if you think about a bar of soap, that's kind of about the size of them. It's kind of, the kidneys are amazing. Okay, so if you lose kidney function, then you'll go on dialysis, and dialysis is a way of cleaning out your blood and eliminating the nitrogen and all the other wastes from your blood without having your kidneys. Okay, now, normally we have 2 kidneys. Sometimes people have 3 or 4. They're not always functional. Sometimes people have 1. Sometimes the size varies. So there are abnormalities with how many kidneys you have, and you can survive. Page 947 has a little clinical connection that discusses that. Okay, so now if we look at the anatomy of the kidney, you're going to do this in lab, but let's just kind of go over it. Let me try to find a color, I guess. Okay, so if we start out here, okay, these triangle things are called the renal pyramids. Let me find a wider. These are called the renal pyramids, okay, and you can see that they're triangles. Okay, now the space in between the pyramids is called the renal column. Okay, so they're columns of space in between the pyramids. Okay, now the kidney is divided into layers. Okay, so the outside edge, like this, is the renal cortex, which makes sense, right? So the cortex is always the outer layer. Okay, and this middle layer, from the cortex in, that is called the renal medulla. Okay, so the middle. Oh, here's the capsule that we're talking about. So the capsule, that's the outside, like the saran wrap layer that covers it. It's adhered to the surface. Okay, now what's going to happen is the urine is going to form in these little microscopic structures in here. Okay, so they're out at the edge of the pyramids. Okay, and then it's going to flow into these calyces, or a calyx. Okay, and the calyx you could think of as a cup. Okay, so we have minor calyx, which are small. Okay, and they're at the end of each pyramid. Okay, and then they come together to form a major calyx. Okay, so a major would be like right in here, or right in here. Okay, and then that forms the renal pelvis, and then the renal pelvis is going to dump into the ureter, and the ureter will dump into the bladder. Okay, so that's kind of the flow, and you're going to look at this on models in the lab. The renal papilla is just the point at the end of the pyramid. Okay, now each kidney has between 8 to 15 lobes, okay, and the lobe is just the pyramid and the cortex that surrounds it. Okay, now the pyramids have nephrons. Okay, so nephrons, nephrons are the functional unit of the kidney. Okay, so they're what's going to do the work and where the urine's going to be made. Okay, now we have 2 kinds of nephrons. There's some that are short, you're going to notice, and some that are really long. And we're going to talk about them more later. Okay, but this is the nephron. Okay, so this is where the urine's going to be made from the blood. Okay, now the nephrons will dump into this collecting duct. And we're going to talk about this more. They'll dump into this collecting duct. And from the collecting duct, then it goes to the renal papilla. and then it'll go into a minor calyx. Okay, so we'll keep talking about that.